Scott Pilgrim is a series which I think is you either love it or hate it from what I've heard. Like one guy just mentioning that half the people will be happy and half will be mad from him just mentioning it, but I've known about the series for quite a while now. I believe I either saw some random play the game on the internet, or I saw the trailer for a movie while in Fiji. Ever since then, the series has always interested me. 5 years later, the most I've seen about the franchise is that a Netflix series has come out, and one other video about the game that did a challenge run. I thought one day in November, and said, sure, why not buy all the books, the game, and watch the other two related products to see if this entire franchise is any good at all. So here I am for the next who knows how long, discussing a story about how a guy beats up a bunch of other guys. Also, this isn't usually what I talk about, and it probably won't become what I usually talk about anytime soon. I was generally just curious and thought it'd be a fun idea. Also, it does have a video game, so it's somewhat related to what I talk about. Bit of background from these books. They were made by Brian Lee O'Malley, and from this Wikipedia article that goes very in depth with the development, here's what I got out of it. It's inspired by manga. Yep. Also, for some strange reason I have these things which I can move somehow. I don't know why. Oh well, now let's get started with Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life. Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life is about Scott Pilgrim and his life. It's kind of like a pilot episode which sets up the premise, and that pilot is episode 1 out of 6 of the series. 23-year-old Scott's dating a high schooler. What the Okay, so this is obviously messed up and wrong, and the book does suggest that this is wrong, but come on! He's dating this high schooler named Knives, when one day a mysterious girl pops into his dreams and he sees her at a library. Surely you don't make the protagonist worse than he already is. He ends up trying to get with her. I'm starting to regret my decision. So let's get this out of the way. Scott is an easily dislikable character for the obviously disgusting stuff, but not only that, he's presumably gonna cheat on his already creepily aged girlfriend. And he does. Wait, what the... Okay, to be honest, he doesn't do this, but he was going to. Like, Jesus Christ. Anyway, apparently Ramona, that's her name by the way, has magical powers which lets her travel through tunnels in people's minds, and has been using Scott's, which has made him obsessed with her, in his words. During his band's gig, he's in a band by the way, a lot of times I'm just not gonna mention stuff before, so hopefully I don't miss any important stuff. During the gig, the first of Ramona's 7 evil ex-boyfriends comes down to fight Scott. Scott wins. To be continued. So this story, it sure is one that devolves into magical realism or magical fiction. Honestly, I'm not quite sure how to genre this. Despite all the creepy elements, I quite liked most of the book. The first 80% of the book is a lot more down to earth than the premise may make it seem. Quite like more slice of lifey books, so this was nice. Besides the big creepo, I quite liked most of the characters on a surface level way, or at least the bit we get to see with them. It does heavily focus on Scott, Knives, and Ramona. All the other characters do seem decent enough. They seem to be more tolerating Scott's action instead of actively endorsing it. At one point I think Kim asks if he's evil or if he's just really happy. The evil boyfriend at the end essentially has no character. To be fair, he is there for 15 pages of the book and has 2 or 3 other mentions through the entire rest of it. The book is surprisingly long though. If the X is just, mwahaha, I'm an evil pity idiot, fight me stupido. Generally though, why does he care so much? It's so weird that they care. It's not like by killing Scott you'll get Ramona back. To the main 3 characters I think we have, I like Knives and Ramona's okay. Scott's an interesting character we get to follow. He's sort of a protagonist which you sort of like but hate. So many of his actions are just so creepy and weird, but he bounces off well when talking to all his friends and has quite a few funny moments, but I mean, he's a creep. After cheating on Knives, he doesn't even break up with her. He's hesitant to do so in the first place, and has to be persuaded to do it by his roommate, which he still doesn't do. Then at the concert, Knives kisses him and Ramona is right around the corner. Everyone looks up at him like they're about to confront him for his crappy actions or a big breakup, but no, he just runs away. His character is just a giant piece of crap. I don't understand why he even has all these friends and acquaintances in the first place. By the end of the book, after I assume people have figured out that Scott has been cheating, Ramona still kisses him. What is going through your mind? I genuinely don't understand how people won't break up with someone when they found out they were cheating on someone else if they were unaware. Even at this point, Mr. Pilgrim hadn't even broken up with Knives yet. This relationship stuff is baffling me. Granted, I know nothing about romantic relationships, But come on! On a more positive note, escaping the horrors of romantic relationships in this book, it is quite a funny book. A lot of parts I laughed at were a lot more of the exaggerated moments, like him zooming away after seemingly being discovered to be dating Knives and Ramona. There is a lot more fourth wall breaking jokes, not like, oh yeah, this is me and that was just silly. More just like little notes left on the page when introducing characters, presumably from Scott's perspective. Otherwise it would make a little sense. Anyway, ignoring that, yeah, the visual humor's good, just like the visuals. The art style inside the book is quite nice. Somehow on the cover though, it looks atrocious. Might be coloring, I'm not sure. The formatting works most of the time. I found quite a few of the pages got cut off and had a hard time reading them due to the pictures leaking into the seam of the book, but I could get most of the words most of the time. I did struggle reading a few though. Also, due to me reading the black and white version of this book, I had trouble distinguishing Scott from one of his friends due to them looking very similar. I don't even know that friend's name, which isn't a good thing, I don't think. At the end of the book, I started getting very confused about things, all relationship shenanigans at the concert and the fight scene in particular, so it's brought up randomly that Scott's a great fighter, as he's fighting the guy like he's in a fighting game or something. Which, okay, then all these friends who happen to be at the concert somehow help him defeat Evil X1. Honestly, I cannot remember what his name is at all. This is also magical on Scott's end when there has been nothing to signify that Ramona has helped Scott and the gang fight them. Not much about the fight is explained and it just all kind of happens. I guess he uses the superpower of teamwork Sonic style. I cannot do a Sonic voice. Also, Knives here, so like, does she know? Because it seems to me everyone knows about both girlfriends, but due to Knives being here, I guess they don't. I honestly have no clue about many of the logistics about how the fight works. The only part which makes sense to me is the magical ex-boyfriend. At least that's explained, and since it's just introduced, it doesn't feel too much out of left field. Overall, Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life, it's pretty decent. It's a pretty easy read, but surprisingly long. Took me more than half an hour to read. Trust me, that's a lot for these types of books. But it obviously has a lot of flaws. Despite that, I'm excited to continue reading more books and see how this goes. Hopefully they explain more of everything so it makes more sense. So on to Scott Pilgrim versus the World. So I had an entire YouTuber apology joke to use because I thought Ramona was a high schooler, then I found out she wasn't, and I thought Scott nearly did it with a high schooler, but I never mentioned the fact that I thought Scott nearly did it with a high schooler, so the stupid joke doesn't work, because, yeah, I forgot to mention that. Anyway, the book that the movie and game use as titles. To be fair, it is the best sounding and most interesting title of all the books, so it's understandable. Also, due to the game and the movie being called this, I thought this was just the name of one book, or they were just a pair of releases. Obviously, I was massively mistaken. Also, the cover hasn't improved much from the last one, so that's great. To be fair, I doubt covers matter too much, it's just interesting. So the plot, it's a lot harder to describe the plot of this book because it's still quite a lot about their lives and not the supernatural elements. So Scott Pilgrim finally breaks up with Knives, which I'll touch on later. He's also sort of researching this next opponent, which looks like he's 30 years old, and he's also an actor. He quote-unquote fights him and actor guy dies. He also gets another gig for his band given to him by his previous ex, who isn't Knives, but left him in a bit of a rut. He accepts it and finds out that the bass guitarist for the ex of Scott is Evil X3. So this book has a lot more going on than the first book. There's a decently sized chunk that we'll get to later. All the art is pretty much in the same style and the same quality, but there is still words being cut off by the page. There is also more sexualization that I refuse to show in this book, which I despise. There was this one scene with some in the first book, but this one has a lot more, and it's so unnecessary as well. At least in the first one, some of it had story purposes. I still want to shoot it, but this book doesn't have any purpose for it to be included. Also, the book breaks the fourth wall much more, and is by the actual characters in one point, which I'm not much of a fan of. In this book, Scott is portrayed as a much more likable protagonist. I think since he actually breaks up with Knives, granted unwillingly, makes a lot of his more creepy and awful moves less prevalent because a lot of them had to do with him dating a high schooler. He is still very much the same character though, they just removed Knives from the equation, which made his character even more awful. The book also starts focusing on Kim and her lives more for like one scene. She has little to no people who seem to like her, and it's a bit crummy. We also get to see the past where Scott meets Kim and this Lisa girl who currently doesn't have any importance. They, being Scott and Kim, actually started a romantic relationship after he killed a guy by showing off his fighting skills. They only broke up because he moved away. Besides a bit of confusion I've had with some elements, like identifying who was who in some places, which if I got the fully coloured version, which do exist, that would have helped. But I got things just fine. I am intrigued into seeing some more of Kim's life and her character though. I believe the school segment would have worked better in the first book. Could have been a dream or something. It gets you more invested in Kim earlier on in the series, and it would also have provided more background on Scott's fighting skills before the first X confrontation, which would have made a lot more sense, and Scott's fighting skills wouldn't have just come out of left field solely for the climax. He seems to lose his fighting skills a bit when he fights the X, but we'll get to that. Ramona seems about the same as usual. She's okay. Most of the other band members and his roommates are still sort of just there. They don't have much of their own little stories, and just more people who get Scott to take some actions and be his friends. The evil boyfriend actually has a lot more personality and build-up during the book. Still a bit cookie-cutter, but definitely a lot better than the first one. He's an actor, but he's only a part of the league because he feels like he's a significant character of Ramona's past, and he's cool and tough. His words, not mine. He poses a bit more of a threat because he beats the hell out of Scott instantly, but he's kind of cool in sort of a stereotypical way and asks him if he wants a break. Then he has discussion with him over a smoke. He tells him that Ramona is very secretive and not a good person. She cheated on him with someone else. Remind you of someone? He offers not to fight him and just say Scott won if he gives him all his money. Scott outsmarts him by making his large ego hurt and makes him skateboard down a flight of stairs where he dies. Which honestly seems out of character for Scott to outsmart someone. He doesn't seem like the brightest character for somewhat obvious reasons. Maybe that's just because of his creepy actions in the first book. X2, despite him not being around for long, like nearly the same length as the first one, is a much more memorable character than the first X, just due to him seeming to have a bit more personality than just evil and spiteful, and it feels like more happens with him. I still don't remember his name though. The actor's death also gives me a lot of questions about the world they live in. He drops money when he dies, which did happen with Steve Alex as well. I just didn't mention it. He just poofs away, which I can accept as just a strange M, or for Americans, PG-13 way to kill his character off. But then an item gets summoned and Scott mentions choosing a skateboard proficiency when he's in school. So what I'm inferring from this is that this is a combination of real life and a video game world. That would help explain some phenomenon that's happened, which I kind of just assumed was exaggeration, but apparently it isn't. I feel like this should have been clarified in the first book, how this world works, since it's obvious by now that it's quite a bit different. You're also introduced to Scott's ex Envy for a short period of time and start learning information about boyfriend 3 Todd, the reason why Envy moved away to Montreal. This provides a lot more connection between the boyfriends and Scott, which is cool. I hope most of the boyfriends aren't like this, because it would just feel a bit odd. Now we move on to the final character to talk about, Knives. Knives, who apparently didn't know about Ramona or anything else at the time, so that scene was pretty pointless. Scott breaks up with her, which doesn't sit well for her, very well at all, which breakups don't seem fun, but sure, I'll accept it. Then she decides to get pot of hair dyed red, which, okay, seems a bit out of character for her, but hey, I'll acknowledge that that's just a weird way to handle a breakup. Sure. While dyeing her hair, she goes on a rant about Scott and this new girl to a friend, which seems a bit more out of character, but sure. I don't feel romance. This is fine. Probably. Then she goes out to kill Ramona with have a guess. This seems like a 180 of what her character was established to be like in the first book. She was happy, upbeat, and seemingly an optimist. Now she's psychopathic and trying to kill people. This came out of left field, and it doesn't make much sense at all for her, unless I missed something. Is this meant to be, foreshadowed because she likes rock music? I doubt it. This decision is so baffling to me. There isn't anything that may hint towards the fact that she may be a bit more two-faced than she first seemed. She even dates one of Scott's friends, or at least I'm assuming that's who that guy is, just to get at him. This is just so strange to me. I don't understand the decision besides for the sake of conflict. One last thing I want to mention is the phone call with Envy. I really liked how it's framed in a bunch of small boxes to symbolize Scott's mindset running, speeding fast, and flashing back to memories. Also shows how difficult it is for Scott talking to her. I did have a bit of trouble following the images a bit, but overall, it was well done. Wait, that was English nerdy. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Despite the somewhat misleading name, it is significantly better than the first book. The main character is made more likable, and many of the elements that were underdeveloped in the first book, like the X and his friends, were improved on. Let's hope the next book maintains or even improves on many of the elements of this book. Speaking of Scott Pilgrim and the Infinite Sadness. Oh no. But the cover's art style has changed to be not bad. Hooray! This hypnosis. Scott fights Todd, but his ex-Envy, who dates Todd, wants to make it as painful as possible for Scott. Scott and Todd end up fighting, Envy makes peace with Scott, the end. So this book is heavily centric around the singular plot, while the others had a bit more dip in and dip out with more slice of life stuff. This book, however, is fully centered around the conflict. First eighth of the book is really not that good. I personally hate awkward scenes in media. This was one of them. Wonderful. I was also fairly lost a lot in this scene. Am I just incompetent? Probably. But that wasn't a great first impression. But the book picks up a lot afterwards. I believe if you only count the first 3/4 of this book, it would be the funniest book by far. There was a lot of great jokes, or at least in my opinion. The character drama is also really well done. The book has a very heavy reliance on flashbacks though. A lot of them are scattered randomly throughout. Well, probably not randomly, but you get what I mean. A lot of the time I didn't even realize there was a flashback happening and got confused about what was happening. I know that the characters have design differences and they put a plaque around anything. I'm just not that great with my perception. They did, however, make all the characters you were meant to like even more likable. Scott and Ramona are much more likable than in the previous 2 books. How? I don't know. By making even more unlikable characters? I'm not sure, but they are better. Ramona, however, does one kind of stupid decision. She calls Envy by her real name, Natalie, but decides to pull out a hammer to fight her. A bit premature, isn't it? She very well could have just walked off afterwards despite her really angry face. Envy is an interesting character. She's just a full-on craphead who seems irredeemable. She wants Scott, her ex, which she dumped, to go through as much suffering as possible. Now this may be because of Evil X3 Todd, but oh well. In all her appearances up until near the end of the book, she is always the worst person in existence. Then she's kind of redeemed, not really. More of an, oh I don't want you dead on the ground crying, but it's still something. Also, Envy helps make this book have more of a personal vendetta for Scott. There's much more stakes on the behalf of his character, besides just not dying, I guess. I do hope this isn't too much of an occurrence for the rest of the series, so then, even though it's formulaic, I feel like this would be worse formulaic. Todd, Evil X3, is an interesting character. He's a qualified vegan and has super psychic vegan powers, which it rubs me the wrong way. I'm not vegan myself, but still, I do eat grass. This choice just feels like it's meant to insult vegans. I am probably just overthinking this and it's just meant to be a funny joke. It's not meant to be an expense at vegans. Anyway, at the start of the book, Todd beats up Scott, which, let's mention Scott. He has been significantly nerfed since the first book. He beat up the first Evil X who had magical powers, no problems at all. But every guy after has absolutely murdered him in combat. Actor Guy just punches him and Todd does the same but with vegan powers. This makes Scott's wins feel unworthy and like he shouldn't have gotten them. He only beats Todd because of something I'll mention a bit later. Todd is also a sack of crap. He does the same confession of love technique on both Ramona and Envy, and heavily applying that they were the only one they did it with, and also cheats on Envy, his childhood friend turned lover. Like, what is going through your pea-sized brain? Well, they are both horrible people, so they're made for each other! Also a massive bonus that Todd has over the other exes so far, that he is actually more prevalent throughout the entire book. He has a fully formed character, and feels like more than just a foe to get past, like it's a two-dimensional game villain. Kim, which should be a character I don't have to mention, but I feel like saying something. I feel like there's more to the character than what is being directly shown to us. I don't exactly know where it's from, but I do want to see more of this character. I want to see more of the inner workings of her instead of just Scott and Ramona. And finally, Knives. Knives is actually handled pretty well in this book. It's like her entire insane obsessor part is punched out of her. Oh. So she's all fangirly for envy, then gets her highlights, which in my mind is the obsession-filled psycho part, out. Which in the end makes the character soften in between books 2 and 1. Unfortunately, this feels more like the character for book 2 Knives, which is one I like less, but she's a lot more reasonable in her character after that point, which I do appreciate considering this is probably what her character is going to be like for the rest of the series. Knives also comes in later to save Ramona for Scott, which I don't think is healthy because she's dating Neil because he looks like Scott. It doesn't signify she's over him, but it also may be herself standing up for herself against envy. Not sure. Knives' character has been improved, but still needs some work for me to actually like her again. Scott finds her in an alleyway where everything is happening, which is weird, but oh well. Both have a kind of nice conversation to each other. They're just being honest and consoling. She's still a tad obsessive, but she is characterized a lot better in book 2. Scott even acknowledges that he's a horrible person. Maybe that's partially why he's a better character now. He could actually acknowledge that he was a crappy person and try to make it better. Now the ending fight, it actually starts off pretty good when it was Ramona and Envy. The action was done well and the dialogue too. When we get to the battle with Todd, however, that part was done poorly. The fight is barely a fight at all. It isn't even a proper guitar battle as promised, which would have been hard to do in a book, but oh well. The reason Todd gets defeated is a Deus Ex Machina, which the book even acknowledges. Todd gets his power taken away by the vegan police because he ate gelato which has milk and egg in it. It is mentioned, but it still felt like a Deus Ex Machina. It kind of does make sense, but it's still stupid. Then Scott just headbutts Todd into oblivion and gets a bonus fight, which still confuses me, but oh well. So overall, the book is good. It's obviously flawed and probably on the same level as Versus the World, but I still quite enjoyed it. Now we're halfway through the book series. Only 3 more books, a movie, a game, and a season of a TV show to go. I don't know why I'm presuming this is a bad thing. Scott Pilgrim gets it together. So this one I feel like I have the least to say about. Watch me spend the next 10 minutes talking about it though. Anyway, so Scott Pilgrim meets Lisa, this one I mentioned in book 2, and causes some relationship problems between Scott and Ramona. While at the same time, 2 ninjas are hunting him down. One of them is evil ex-boyfriend 4. Wait, they say that they are gay, and the other one is a mystery man. While at the same time, Scott tries to find a way to pay rent. How fascinating. There's a lot more stuff going on that I haven't mentioned, like how Wallace, who is Scott's roommate, which I've mentioned once, well, Wallace and Scott need to find somewhere else to live before the landlord evicts them. I'll get to the conclusion at the end of the book for a bit of structure mix-up. The book starts at the beach. That's better. Wait, I can't read all the books now. This book has way too much unnecessary sexualization. At least some of it is thematic and for, like, reasons inside the book, but most of it is not. Also a bit off topic, but I feel like this art style has evolved. I might just be crazy though. Scott is really not a good in this book. Like, if you know what he's doing, which took me a bit to realize. Okay, I understand why there are some relationship issues, but dude, Scott, what in the actual swear word? He is a creep again, but like for 2 minutes, which I mean isn't the worst. Could have been dating a teenager. Oh my god, these 2 kiss drunkenly. But Kim, you know her age. What are you doing? You even called Scott out on it. So it doesn't make much sense. Also, this is the most development with Kim we get in this book, which, if this didn't happen, it would bug me a lot. But I feel like there's something we are missing with this character, but it is being neglected from the crappy relationship drama. I will say the drama has a really good conclusion, but it's just a bit annoying. There are still more books in this series, and we know Scott isn't doing much wrong, but the drama is so generic, it's kind of boring. And you know the outcome, so whatever. Ramona isn't totally unreasonable, but like, I don't think she ever found out about Knives and Scott still being a thing when they start to date, so she doesn't have much reason to fear. Knives is fine, like in the last book, and I certainly like her characterization better, but she still has massive mood swings, and like, I get breakups are usually hard, but give this girl something else to do besides have her dad try to kill Scott. Oh yeah, that's this guy. It wasn't Knives who sent him, he did it on his own volition. Anyway, Evil X4 is fine besides the sexualization at the end of the book, and all the other characters I've mentioned are fine. Julie, who was barely prominent in the third book, and I feel like hasn't been in the other books, but apparently she has, is now a mainstay and noticeable, and I hate her so much. She's just an absolute craphead and somewhat friends with the protagonist. She's not positioned in the story as someone who's necessarily evil, which annoys me. Now Lisa is pretty one note. She just wants to get with Scott Pilgrim and dresses more attractive apparently to do so. She even encourages him to cheat on Ramona at one point. He doesn't do it. He isn't that terrible besides the fact that Lisa is from Scott's past and there isn't much interesting going on with her. I just really like all the things around the relationship and battle stuff, to be honest. Just Scott's trouble in getting a job and staying in it, and just the smaller things that don't matter too much to the main plot. I'm also starting to notice that these characters aren't really friends. They all seem to just hate each other. I can't think of a time any one of them did something nice for each other, excluding romantic related stuff. The closest I can get is in the third book where Wallace helps Ramona. Besides that small part, all the friendships just feel like they actually hate each other. They're constantly insulting each other and have no interest in hanging out, but they still do. It's starting to get kind of miserable. Also, just get done because I don't have anything else to say. I'm gonna go to the ending. So Scott actually says for the first time, apparently, that he loves Ramona, which honestly was really well done, because he pulls his sword out of her chest and it's sort of just like it's just posed really well, and it's just satisfying. Knives' uncle says that Scott isn't horrible and Scott moves in with Ramona, the end. So yeah, it's good. I just don't feel like there's as much to say about the characters or the plot. This time, I did enjoy a decent amount of it. I did remember a vast amount of what happened, but just, I don't know. Anyway, on to Scott Pilgrim vs. the Universe. Holy crap! This book isn't that great. It's not even that good. It's bad. Scott has to fight these two Japanese guys who are twins and roboticists, and Ramona has a freak out because she finally, after like 3 books, learns that Scott cheated on Knives with her, which makes Ramona become the most unlikable character in existence. Now, for most characters this wouldn't be unusual, it might make them a bit annoying, but in the right. I have so many problems with Ramona's characterization in this book, it's infuriating. First of all, I always thought of the character as meaning to be cool, or at least that's the angle I got from her presentation and actions. She wasn't arrogant or mean in a way that felt like they were just being mean, always at least a friendly mean, which I don't believe is a good quality, but hey, better than just being mean. But in this book, she is an absolute, for lack of a better term, female dog. The entire inciting incident that made her into this near unrecognizable character was nice, but also her being a... Wow, I don't have many words to describe this behavior, which I like saying. You know what behavior though. To Knives, which, like, I understand somewhat why. She's obviously not over Scott, or at least wasn't in book 3. It's a bit harder to tell in book 4. Ramona obviously knows she's an obsessive lunatic, so what she decides to do is aggravate this other character I don't like. Knives has been regressed again, and I know the point is that she's taking way too long to get over Scott, but it's turned into someone I liked into a character I hate. She bloody attacks Ramona because of her craftiness. In the third book, she stopped obsessing as much over Scott and became not a psychopath, which I liked, but apparently no, she didn't. This was all just a bluff. I hate how much her character has been regressed, thereby making her character worse. Again! I will say that Ramona was a bit crappy and angry before, for little reason. She just didn't want to go to Scott's concert because she didn't like her band. What? She's become a massive wolf because she didn't want to go to Scott's concert? huh? This extreme character diversion came from this just one small little thing. Ramona, after this encounter, I got a bit sidetracked, gets told by Nose about cheating and becomes a massive hypocrite. How is she a massive hypocrite? Because we are told that she cheated on others before, which makes all the anger in her character worse. There's nothing shown to show us that she has improved and grown from that. In the last book, we are shown a scene that looks like she's still in love with Gideon, who is the final evil X that has popped up occasionally. I don't think I've mentioned that. At the very least has fears of being trapped under Gideon. She even knows that Scott was inside her head, so he has every reason to believe that you are cheating on him or still love Gideon. But nope, she just doesn't have any rational thinking and becomes the worst to everyone. The only character worse is Julie, because she just really sucked anyway. She's just an awful human being with no redeeming qualities about her whatsoever. I'm just so sick of this relationship drama, and it's only existed in 2 books. And the ending of the last book, they had a fairly wholesome moment showing that the relationship has improved. It has gone better than that. But despite the awful characterization and repetitive relationship drama, I am genuinely excited for the finale. Not in a I want to get this over way, but I have a feeling it's going to be a really good way. Because the last quarter of this book is genuinely the best of the series so far. To elaborate more on the plot, they all decide to get drunk, they all being Kim, Ramona, and Scott, like very, very, very drunk, and become not horrible characters. Kim actually shows some sign of affection for her friends, which is great, if they weren't drunk. Like, I guess it does show they actually care for each other, but I mean, they had to be drunk to actually be kind to each other, so what's the point? It's still infuriating. Kim gets kidnapped by the Japanese guys. Yeah, Ramona's exes are these Japanese twins that I haven't exactly said, but oh well. They're pretty okay. They pose somewhat of an okay threat, but they kind of just stand around and not do too much until the finale. Back to the point, Scott needs to save Kim from them, but he only finds out in the morning, not after more relationship problems. Yippee! He rushes out of the house, telling Ramona, but she doesn't properly hear him. He goes to fight them in an action scene, which has decent substance like the one in book 4, which is great. He fights them and nearly loses when Kim says that she got a message from Ramona, which lifts Scott's spirits due to them, still being in the fight. She didn't actually get a message and her phone's flat. And not only does fake Ramona make him get back in the fight, but Kim does as well by yelling her encouragement. This one scene makes Kim the best character in the series. Ignore that! It's still unfortunate we don't get a proper backstory or more to her character, but this is compensation enough. I believe if you read in between the lines you could probably find something, but yeah, Kim is actually showing she cares for other characters in a platonic way is awesome, and much better than the rest of them who seem to all hate each other. After the boyfriends evaporate into midair, Scott saves Kim and rushes home to Ramona, who has cut her hair for some reason. He tells her how much he loves her, but she ends up disappearing. Ramona upset while doing so, but seemingly gets happier when Scott comes by. Scott then wanders out of the house, but accidentally locks himself out of the house with no way in and all connection with Ramona besides her cat, which ran away. Afterwards, Scott's life tumbles out of control. Kim moves away, he needs to find a new place to live, attacks his own brother for looking slightly like Gideon. Oh yeah, we find out that what Gideon looks like this, due to his early dementia apparently. Don't worry, you're not missing anything about his brother. I didn't know that either until this point. All is lost. Then he gets a call from Gideon, and he heavily implies that he took Ramona. All that last paragraph, or 2 that I've said, are executed so well and had me so invested, and is by far the best part of the entire series so far. Unfortunately, Ramona in the rest of this book drags it down so much, because as I said earlier, I'm actually excited for this last book. This last 40 pages, I don't know, outshines very, very brightly the rest of the book. So yeah, I'm excited for the finale. Before I can get to that, let me quickly go over the other character not mentioned or covered. Scott's normal, all of his friends excluding Kim are about the same. Nothing too major needed. Yep, that's it. For our last book of this franchise, let's read Scott Pilgrim's Final Hour. Woo! This starts off 3 months after Ramona disappears and Scott has just quit life. He's done. He does nothing but sit around all day and plays video games, which does feel quite accurate to me. I mean his character. Yeah, that. Also, he plays on the PSP Go of all things, which is just kind of odd, especially considering I believe it flopped commercially. Anyway, so after being talked to by his friends, and I'm either remembering incorrectly or maybe his character has changed, but Wallace is pretty decent in this book. He's here for like 10 pages. Well, back on track, Steven tells Scott that he has a gig for a new band he's made and invites Scott over. There he meets Knives, but finally sane again! Finally! She's 18 now, and Scott, immediately after finding this out, asks her if she wants to have casual bedtime. Are you kidding me? Knives declines like a sane person and proves she's grown up, and that Scott is a piece of crap because this is a memory of their relationship. Just her praising Scott. They do a mini makeout, but it's awful to them and me. Repeat this for Envy Adams, who has the worst anatomy of anyone I've ever seen drawn, or at least I think. It just looks unnatural to me. I could just be insane though. And Envy turns out to be dating Gideon. Scott sees him for the first time IRL. He runs away. I really like Scott's wimpy characterization because it makes the upcoming parts of the book so much more satisfying, and I do feel like it is very on character for him to have this breakdown like this, unlike Lawson forces him to do a wilderness sabbatical and ends up going to Kim's place. Kim takes him out on a wilderness sabbatical and Scott decides to kiss Kim. But then Kim reminds him about the past and how Scott never told her he was moving. He told Lisa, and saving Kim from rooftop was a lot less like in the second book. He wasn't the superhero he thought. Then the physical manifestation of his past comes up. He calls it funny slur joke. Scott fights it and nearly fails, but accepts that you have to learn from the past. Everything comes back. This is a pretty great opening, even though it's 1/3 of the book, and I just kind of wanted to see Scott murder Gideon, but hey, all this character building is done really well, and Kim is still a good friend and the best character. Ignore that! Scott regains courage / motivation / whatever and goes back to whatchamacallit, Toronto, to confront Gideon. We are shown that he is in fact an awful boyfriend, even though it was established before, but hey, I'm not complaining. Scott meets up with a bunch of people at Envy's debut album at Gideon's new club for whatever reason. It's probably just convenience. After Envy starts singing, Gideon starts fighting Scott, and then we find out Gideon doesn't have Ramona. This twist is perfect because it's never explicitly or even hintedly stated that Gideon has Ramona. It's just an assumption everyone makes about the characters, even the characters inside the book. We technically didn't know what happened besides she just disappeared. We assumed that it was Gideon who did it. The two still fight and Gideon invites Scott to join the Evil X's. Makes sense because most of them are dead. He declines and oh my god, he just got stabbed! Again, this was all done really well where I decided to keep going and not sleep while I was reading this. It's probably not smart to read these at night. Who cares? This is the last book, I don't care. Anyway, Gideon. He's just a character who's just kind of insane and I love it. Who's the final boss to an insane person? An even more insane one. I love his character, even though it is fairly one-dimensional, but like, I don't know, I just like it. And the fact that this fight scene is quite bulky is also nice, considering the start of a book series, they were quite short and doesn't have much substance. So Scott's dead. I guess that's what heaven looks like. And Ramona turns up. Somehow. Not really explained besides subspace magic. Ooh. Ramona just talks to Scott about how she feels bad for running away and realized that she's an awful person. Scott doesn't care and kisses her, but she kind of accepts it. After a joke, his extra life pops up and he's alive again and Ramona is back. This book is probably the funniest one yet. It has a lot of jokes I laughed at quite a bit, but also knows how to make the suspense not die. Anyway, Gideon just rather casually reveals a giant magic crystal with 6 girls, assumingly previous girlfriends, in them. This guy is an absolute psycho and I love it. Scott somehow doesn't die. Ramona gets stabbed though after showing that Gideon's memories of Ramona are like Scott's memories. Okay, look, my explanation and recounting of the story annoys me too a bit, but I can't think of a better way to get across my points because a lot of them are very story reliant and probably require story context. Just about every scene is heavy spoilers, so I feel like context is needed. So yeah, sorry. Please stick with me through this, we'll get to the movie soon. Gideon explains how she goes through cyberspace is by the same means he achieves emotional warfare, and has trapped Ramona inside her own head, which causes Scott to go into the magical bag to get inside her head because that works. Sure, we find out that the Ramona who seemed to be nervous of being trapped by Gideon was actually sort of part of Gideon. It's a bit confusing, but he just becomes really large and buff, and sort of all parts of inner Ramona help fight him out, which I think is neat. Also, I'm getting tired of describing the book, but eventually they beat Gideon and remain in their relationship, or get back together, depending on the view. This whole fight and their realizations and character evolution is just so fun to watch and read unfold. The action is really done well. Afterwards, we get to see that Scott gets his life back together, and despite everything his character has done, it's kind of neat, especially after everything with Gideon and that psycho. We end on an unnecessary underwear shot, which I won't show. Wonderful! My voice is cracking. I've talked for too long. We're not even done yet. This book is by far the best book in the series. The characters are at their most likable, the action is great, and all the character stuff is just really well done. I'm so happy that my optimism at the end of the last book was rewarded and not punished. So that was every Scott Pilgrim book. Did I regret it? Nope. I'm acting like that I still don't have a movie, a game, and a TV show to cover. Would I recommend this series? If you're interested in it, as you must have been since you've listened to me ramble for this long, or even just turned up, yeah, I believe it would be worth it. Even though I have spoiled the entire series, I still believe it would be worthwhile if you're interested. Sorry about that. I would rank the books in this order, just in case you're interested. The ranking from worst to best is Book 5, Book 1, Book 4, Book 2/3, and finally, Book 6. Now on to Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the movie one. I totally have the DVD and didn't just rent it. See, look, I'm moving it around. Scott Pilgrim is dating a high schooler. Great first impression for the audience. He soon after gets obsessed with Ramona Flowers. They start dating, but first Scott has to defeat Ramona's 7 evil exes. So in other words, pretty much the same as the book series. Scott in the books, I always imagined as being more of a headstrong, overconfident person. Always makes everything seem a lot bigger and acts in a sort of cool but not really way. Scott in the movie is an awkward little weasel, and I kind of love it. Even though both the characters are very similar, just the actor's portrayal of the character just makes it seem so much different. The script also probably has a role to play in the department as well. Scott's a bit more of a socially anxious nerd who likes talking about whatever interests them. Oh god, that sounds similar to me. Oh no. I don't get as much overconfident energy as I get from the books. He interacts well with the rest of the cast. A lot of the other characters don't get much screen time unless they're the main three. They're just sort of the bandmates, or Scott's sister, or the worst person on Earth. Ramona is a fine character. She doesn't have the weird regression as in book 5, but she doesn't have that much development at all. Sort of a plot device, but oh well. This movie's already kind of crammed, so I don't blame the writer. The movie does accentuate the problem I have with one of the main scenes from the original that I had a problem with. The one where Knives kisses Scott. Ramona very, very obviously sees the fact that Knives kisses Scott. She even makes this weird expression, but it should be obvious. They are dating or in love or something else. To me, this is not a platonic kiss. I know that they aren't officially together, but that would be as suspicious as hell smooth. Now Knives is actually a much better character in this movie than the first. They did this by doing one sole thing. They portrayed her more obsessive side before she became a maniac. Even then, the maniacy? Is that the word? No. It's a word now then, whichever one I decide to use. Even then, the maniacy still feels a tad odd, but at least it's much better than the first book. It doesn't feel like the character got annihilated because the author wanted to make her more prevalent in the books after the first one. They altered her character ever so slightly, which made a lot of the action she takes seem more in line with the character presented at the start of the movie. She's still insane, but we don't have the massive switch on the character. She also gets blue highlights, not red. Like, it makes sense, but it's just a bit... I don't know, I felt like pointing that out. Another great thing about this movie are the first two evil X's, which are handled super well. They're much more memorable in this movie than in the books. The second X is probably the most different out of portrayal of the first two X's. The second X actor guy, I can still not remember his name. It's quite a large character difference in the movie. He just doesn't care and has 20 billion stunt doubles that Scott has to fight, which is funny when they all just start kicking him on the ground. He's also just a bit over the top, and I really like it. The first Evil X, Matthew Patel, leaves much more of a significant impact on the story that I actually remembered his name. Wow, he is given so much more personality and spirit, it's insane to think that these two are meant to be the same character. In the original, he is so one-note. He's just a spiteful douche. In the movie, he's a spiteful douche, but with pizzazz. He's just so over the top and a bit of a theater kid. He is an absolute joy to watch and just gets dunked on. He also introduces the first action in the movie, and to be honest, the first impression isn't good, but in a good way. He uses weird VFX CGI thing which doesn't look good, but the thing is, this is a comedy action. I would not have been too fussy if all the fights looked like this, but they don't, which is not a disappointment, because the regular action scenes are done so well. The choreography is amazing, and has no right to be so good in a movie with this silly premise. It's impressive how well Scott can fight, but since it wasn't brought up at the end of a book, it doesn't feel as out of the blue. The VFX in this movie could be better in a couple places, but is done really well for the most part. You have this big music monster fight which looks amazing, and all the more video gamey stuff and all the coins look fine. But then you have the evil girlfriends Patel summons which look genuinely awful. They also have a lot more of the video gamey stuff happen during the movie, so then it feels a little less out of place the few times it gets mentioned during the story. It's still a bit odd that the fact a lot of the more magical elements in the seemingly mostly normal, well, for the starting of the film, but you get used to it quite quickly. Unlike the books where it only comes up a few times a book, usually near the end, and the rest of the book is mostly grounded, this is spread decently throughout. The movie was also really funny, but not in the dialogue, mostly in the visual humor. The visual humor of the movie, to me, is on point. I can't think of that many jokes that didn't visually land, which didn't also rely on actual words to make funny. Like, Scott jumps out of a window at one point, which is hysterical. There are also a few jokes that worked, which were more word-based, but a lot of the time, they were misses and not hits. Julie just swearing a lot isn't that funny, because at least where I live, the age rating is mainly for teenagers, and if you've been a teenager, which I assume you are, know that teenagers are profanity machines. It's also odd because you have some of the characters swearing in the movie, so one of them being censored because they said the F word is a bit out of place, because I don't know, it's just to me, but the F word and most other swear words you'd hear on similarly rated media have the same level of severity because of how overused they are. They also do repeat some of the jokes out of the book, and some scenes are nearly word for word recreated. For the first half an hour-ish, excluding some Patel stuff, there aren't any scenes noticeably out of order or even that different. I even tried quoting one scene and got fairly close. The rest of the movie, around when we get to the movie set of the movie, that's not a confusing sentence at all, I'm keeping it. Well, I've already said it, if whatever. Becomes quite different in a lot of areas, which aren't necessarily bad. The rest of the movie is still great, just different from the books. Ex-Boyfriend 3 is when I believe the movie takes a bit of a stumble. I just feel like everything around Envy and Todd is weaker than the books. In the books, we had a whole book revolving around Envy and Todd, which does feel warranted. Envy is a massive part of Scott's past, and one of the only links to any of the evil exes that specifically revolved around Scott. The greater focus on her in the book is warranted because of this. In the movie, Envy does have a slightly underwhelming role Hyrule. She still has the call with Scott, which isn't done as good in the books. I prefer that it felt a bit more uneasy with how everything is separated to small boxes. Here's some pictures in the background change and Envy's mouth pops up. Still works fine, but it's just hampered a bit. The unfortunate thing is that Envy only has 2 more scenes in this movie. Now, I understand why this is the case. It's not a book series, and 1/6 of the film isn't a lot to focus on her. She's also a bit less threatening than in the books, but oh well. One annoying thing is that Envy and Scott don't even make up or have any closure. After Scott headbutts Todd, Envy has barely any lives afterwards. It's disappointing, especially when she played such a large part in the books. Toad's pretty much the same as in the books though, and he leaves a pretty decent impression on the audience. However, I can't say the same thing for Girl X and Evil Twins. They leave nearly no impact on the film to me. Girl 1 is just a psycho and has a design I'm not showing, so here's her face. The twins are there for an even shorter amount of time compared to the last one. They don't even have any spoken lines in the movie. The most they do is just look at each other and nod. They are just another fight with a musician, but it's done differently, so I don't mind. They summon a creature out of the music that they're playing to attack Scott and everyone else. Despite this battle technically having significance to the plot, it really doesn't feel that way because this fight is so quick. It is a bit of a spectacle to behold though. I understand why some of the exes had to be shorter than others due to time limitations and Gideon needing more than the others. Psycho Girl at the very least had an introduction beforehand and the fight scene. The twins literally only have the fight scene and is by far the shortest fight scene out of all of them by a long shot. Now Gideon in the movie isn't as much of a hateable little crap. He seemingly at first gets Ramona fairly by her just falling back in love with him. Though it seems reluctantly when Gideon calls Scott, he doesn't seem that bad. He even offers Scott and his band, well, Stevens, but you get the point. He offers the band to a record deal and we even see them playing at his theater. Does this seem like the actions of an evil dude? We don't even get to see his more evil side until after Scott arrives at the Chaos Theater later in the book. Only then do we start seeing Gideon being more malicious. A thing I do quite like a lot about this movie is how they handle the extra life. When Scott gets a life, it makes slightly more sense, literally because he says he's gonna get a life, but the extra life is after the twins is a thing I don't like. I like it earlier so then it's easier to forget about and the shock of the death may come more of a surprise than feel like, oh yeah, he's just gonna revive. However, how the life actually works, I do quite love. Instead of boom, Scott's alive now, you restarting the level, Gideon's theater again, leads to some funny jokes and Scott's character getting double the progression. The first time he gets the power of love, which ends up failing. The second time after he compliments all his friends and sort of lifts them up and be's a good person and does this fight for himself instead of Ramona, gains the power of guts, which isn't the word, like, who cares, it's done well. Knives comes back here and sort of ends up being on at the very least neutral terms with Scott. I think all Scott does is apologize, which I don't know, feels a bit off how they are just friends after she comes in to kill Ramona, which I don't like the fact that it's at the end of the movie, but I think that's just my autism speaking and saying it's different. Bad. This finale to the film is still fantastic with the action and the comedy and the stakes. Has a couple of problems, but the pros vastly outweigh the cons. One final thing I want to mention is the fact that all of the characters are overall much more likable than in the books. They don't come off as a bunch of people tolerating each other's existence. Except Julie. Like, why wouldn't she? Overall, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is a fantastic movie. It has superbly choreographed action, wonderful comedy, and an overall engaging plot which, even if you weren't that interested in the series, I would still suggest checking out the movie, because despite how much I compared it to the books, in a vacuum, this movie is still great. Personally, I believe that this is the best media out of the entire franchise so far, which is rare to see. A movie that generally doesn't outdo the source material, especially when they're adapting something which would be better as a TV show from the outset. I'm impressed how well they adapt the books into this movie. No, I'm not talking about the TV show next, because in the same year to release alongside the movies, Universal reached out to Ubisoft, or at least I assume, to make a game based off the series. And that's probably, maybe my sources are made of a hell up, so it must be true, created Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game. The story, have a shot in the dark. What the hell? It's an expression! Anyway, yeah, 7 evil exes, go murder them. Actually, how do you sue someone for murdering you? This game is a retro-styled side-scrolling beat-em-up, like River City Rampage. I've only played that game for 10 minutes and wasn't a big fan, so I could be very much wrong. So anyway, that was a concern heading into this. When you pick story mode, you get to pick from 6 characters, assuming that you're playing the complete edition. You get Scott, Steven, Kim, Ramona, Knives, and Wallace, each having at least somewhat unique movesets. I picked Kim to play the game as. You have 2 main attacks you can perform, and you can unlock more moves by playing the game and leveling up. A lot of the time, the extra moves that you can pull off don't feel like they affect much, because a lot of them are performed by holding a direction while attacking the enemy. The few I did notice worked quite well were actually quite nice to use. Mainly the ones that could hit an enemy that's been knocked over. You also have 2 specials and... So I picked Steven to play this game as. I have no idea why they put this in the game and why it's broken. So these specials use up the BP or whatever it's called, the icon below the health bar, but if you don't have any BP, it uses health. The kissing is a healing move and uses 11 BP and heals 15, so it's an infinite health exploit. I'm so baffled why Ubisoft put this in the game. The only reason that would be that they ran out of ideas or just didn't know the age of knives. The game is separated into 7 levels, all containing 2 or more segments to it, and you can choose any of the segments to start the level at when you've been the level. For example, the first level you start in the suburbs and go to the shopping district. After you've been the level, you can replay it and just start at the shopping district. I believe this is a good idea, especially if someone just wants to refight bosses quicker or wants to grind for money, which can be used at the shops. At most shops you can buy food which heals your HP, BP, or gives you a permanent stat upgrade. I'm mixed about that last one. If I didn't know anything about that beforehand, I probably would have completely missed that feature for a while and gotten absolutely destroyed later on in the levels, even though I was kind of getting destroyed the entire game. You also have a special shop in the shopping district where you pay off a massive late fee. You get the most broken item in the game, made to specifically boost your stats for cheap after the one-time massive cost. It's absolutely insane. And again, I'm a bit mixed on. If you're okay enough, you can just buy a bunch of extra lives and steamroll through the game, having 10 deaths before a game over on each level. What I think is one of the hardest bosses in this game that kicked me to the dirt the first time was trivialized after I unlocked the shop. Also, for whatever reason, it says you still have late fees when you exit the actual shop part of the shop, even though when you go back to the NPC, all the usual options pop back up. This edition of this game has been out for a while. I don't know why this hasn't been fixed. One thing I do quite like about the shopping system is that when you buy something from the shop and quit to the world map, your stat changes stay the same, which is quite nice. Makes it so much easier to get these stat boosts and not have to do half of the first level again, which is nice. The stats are pretty typical besides speed. Speed is odd to me. When you start the game, your speed is terribly slow. You have a walk and dash, which is a bit finicky to use because you have to tap and tap hold a direction. Walking regularly was painful to do early on because of this, which I think made the game earlier on less fun. The game was more fun later on because of this raised move speed, because it felt like you were actually getting places and made moving up and down on the screen less painful. Also increases the weight you swing weapons at, I believe. During the game you can pick up weapons which enemies either drop or they're just a part of the environment. The only problem with the weapons is that the optimal strategy is to grab a weapon with decent range, go to the end of the screen, and flail, which works most of the time, especially with a ninja sword or these things, due to their range and durability being high. One of the things I found annoying is the fact that the 3D kind of not really style of the game has caused me to just miss some attacks because I wasn't on the right horizontal axis, because you can't attack anyone above or below you without doing a jump kick or something. I understand why this is, because it wants to stay faithful to this style of game, and perspective might get a bit odd if you did do an attack that did that, but it can be a bit annoying. Especially when you don't get as fast vertical movement. You just get this hop, so trying to adjust your position without jumping is very difficult to do so at lower speeds. The bosses in this game are decently done. They are definitely stronger enemies. The earlier ones kind of don't do much if you just aggro them. Todd is a bit annoying due to his electric attack, but once you find a way to deal with that, he is quite easy. The fourth level feels like it does have a massive difficulty spike. It's much longer than the previous 2 levels, having 3 segments instead of 2, and also a lot of the ninja enemies, which I found that out of the first 6 levels, they are the hardest enemies in the game. They don't appear in any other level, which is odd. The easiest boss in the game by far is Kyle and Ken. For one, you have full movement during their cutscene, so if you bring a weapon, you can just hit and damage them before their proper introductions, which helps trivialize the boss. It's also just an easy boss. This level has 2 other mini-bosses in it, which were harder than the twins inside the level. It also references their music-making talents from the movie. This game more closely follows the book story and representation of characters, which I find odd. Wasn't this released to be a tie-in with the movie, due to it sharing the same name and release year as it? I can see this mainly just being Ubisoft possibly making a game before the movie production, or they started planning, designing, etc. before the movie production, so they didn't have the script or much of the movie to go off, so they just based it off the books. I personally don't mind. They do throw in a few more movie parts here and there, but I just find it weird. Before I get to the last level, I want to discuss the soundtrack of the game. It's really good. It tries to replicate the 8-bit NES sounds just without the instrumental limitations, because I have a hard time believing these songs would come out of an NES. Also, just gonna highlight 2 songs I really like. The first one is called The Dark One, and the second one is called Maka Yai Ya This. The last level was slightly underwhelming. There are a lot of good, don't get me wrong, but I just feel like it was a bit short. Buff Gideon and oh god, what on earth Gideon were great. What on earth Gideon was very tough, but I feel like it borders on unfair. But the design of him is so creepy and unnerving and just insane. I love it. The bottom half of him is a hellish abomination of all the other X's. Like, what? The main problem with the level is that it just feels kind of short. It doesn't feel like a long, grueling test of your skills because it only has one time lock segment when you're on the elevator of the theater, which gets repetitive visually, and having to break all the clamps gets annoying. And you also get a short but fairly easy level after you beat Buff Gideon, but it only has like 2 swarms of bats before what on earth Gideon. My voice is dying. Help. Kind of lame. After God Gideon, I'll call him, you have more level, which is pretty decent. Robot 1 from the twin stage are regular enemies, which is pretty neat. The fight against Gideon Gaze with the pixel sword for the movie. Yep, that's how it essentially went on my first run. Overall, Scott Pilgrim, the game, was a pretty decent game. I had my fun with it, and if I felt like replaying it again with another character, I would, but I don't at this current point. If you're a fan of this genre of games or style, I would say go for it. If you're unsure, I don't know, it's up to you. And finally, we are here at the most recent thing released in the Scott Pilgrim franchise, retelling the story for a 4th time. Now let's get on with Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. This series makes me so terribly irate I have been put back into my body. Yes, that's what I'm going with. Now I'm gonna kind of cover this in 3 sections. The first episode, the second to the 6th episode, and the final 2 episodes. this will also be a bit trimmed down and not my full thoughts. So I'm not talking about this show for 20 minutes, and I want to sort of focus on a lot of the higher points and why the series annoys me so much. So, the first episode, it was pretty boring. I think it's just because I've experienced a story 3 times within a month at this point, so it was a lot less interesting. But it was just unfunny. They even repeated a gag from the movie and it didn't work, or at least I assume this was a joke considering the movie. It just doesn't work because it's animated and the people in this world look closer to that drawing than if it was done in real life. And the drawing isn't even that terrible, it ruins the joke, I don't get it. I also kind of heavily dislike the fact you get to see more of the X's before the first confrontation. It just lessens the impact and sort of makes more of the mysterious elements of Gideon disappear. Now Matthew Patel, he's better than in the books, I'll say that much, but not by much. His more theatre kid energy is there, but a lot more of his eccentric actions, which gave movie Patel extra pizzazz and life as a character, aren't there. He throws a disco ball, but that's about it in the episode. He doesn't do any movements, he just stands there. The initial action that ensues after that is kind of crap as well, but it gets better afterwards. I thought that this was a much weaker interpretation of his character, based on this episode alone, and gave me low expectations on this retelling of the story, and it would just make the initial story worse. Especially in Book 5, I was dreading the adaptation of Book 5. Anyway, Scott loses and dies to Patel. There you go, my reaction. This decision was so baffling at first, because like, if he just revives it and kill Patel like I was expecting, it would just kind of ruin the final confrontation. Him dying would have less of an overall value to the plot or have any dramatic shock. I didn't realize the series had next to nothing in common with the story of the series it shares its name with. The next 5 episodes mainly focus on Ramona and her escapades and trying to figure out where in the world is Scott. Pilgrim, that was awful, because she figures out in episode 3 that he's in fact not dead. So now this plot is turned into a mystery show. As you may be able to tell if my tone is my voice is toning. I'm not the biggest fan of this change. This part of the plot doesn't appear often besides Ramona being places as well. Episode 2 is also pretty bizarre. A good half of it is devoted to the evil X's, which I find odd. It's all about them meeting because Patel didn't get that girl. They argue and Matthew Patel and Gideon fights over who owns the company. Matthew Patel wins. This kind of just boggles me. Matthew winning affects nearly nothing throughout the rest of the core story. It affects one thing in the story which isn't much. Kind of links up some of the complaints and we'll get there soon. And since Scott isn't truly dead, we don't overly get to see the complete parallel universe of it because of all this other shenanigans happening, which I'll get into why they happened a bit later. Episode 3 of the series is stretched the best episode of the series and nearly one of the best parts in this franchise. For whatever reason, Evil X4, the girl, or Roxanne, or Rox, I can't remember, who cares. Evil X4 is the second Evil X4, which is odd, but what they do with her character is the best direction this character has taken in this series. In all other portrayals of character, she just seemed kind of insane. Even in her introduction, she seems to just be there out of spite. Then after a creative fight scene with the use of subspace portals and different shows, movies in the video rental store, which does bring up some questions about how they work, but I don't mind. During this fight we get to show glimpses into the two paths together, and it's quite tragic for Roxy. Ramona just left suddenly with no reason. This gives us insight into Ramona's character, and it's just beautifully done. The apology and everything feels so sincere, and it's done so well, and is the second most memorable part of the series. And this one is because of how emotionally powerful it is. Before I knew how much of a departure the series would take, which, reflecting on it, I'm not that bright of a person, I thought this was a great direction to take this character. It was odd it was only the second X that we got an emotional resolution to the story though. It would have been better if it came later in the series. Anyway, so all the evil X's get redeemed by the end. I kind of dislike this decision. Half the redemptions don't even feel earned at all. And Gideon doesn't even end up being redeemed in the end anyway. Like, kind of, but like, not really. The way a lot of them get redeemed, or even just not evil, gets progressively worse as the show goes on. First one with Roxy is great, phenomenal as I just said, but the others are worse. Actor guy, he's a fine character, he's kind of a generic famous person, but how he's redeemed is so strange to me. After he beats up all the paparazzi ninjas, which are based off the games, I think, I can see what you did show. More paparazzi comes and Ramona just helps Actor Guy out. He's fine now though, he doesn't mind Ramona. They're all good. No tough thing. Water under the bridge. There might have been a small apology, but nothing that made this feel like a natural progression of a character or them becoming okay with each other's existence. The only problem is if they did this big dramatic conclusion to each of the X's stories, and that being the main focus of the episodes, it would be somewhat repetitive unless they found a unique way to do this. But I can't think of any ideas that they could make each one of them unique. So they ended up doing this, and what they did with Todd. Todd just gets rejected and depressed and doesn't get redeemed, he's just depressed. So essentially Todd falls in love with Wallace Wells after the director decided to kiss between them in the movie they're making about Scott Pilgrim if he succeeded at beating Matthew Mattel. So in other words, this thing. It makes more sense if you watch it. If you haven't, don't worry. Anyway, Tom becomes infatuated with Wallace, and they, in massive quotes, read lines in their van a lot. Tom makes a proclamation of love to Wallace, gets rejected, eats chicken or something not vegan, I don't remember that specifically, but boom! In essence, redeemed, which just seems so preposterous. I guess his new rejection sort of made him not care about Ramona and not evil, which I guess kind of makes sense, but is super underwhelming in context of the first redemption, and even just redemptions in general. However, despite these problems, I was still somewhat entertained. It's decently entertaining and somewhat funny. Nowhere near the movie, but probably the same as the books in the funny department. I wasn't bored by this series completely yet. A lot of the more negative aspects were more just odd in my opinion and underwhelming. Now this doesn't start getting stupid until near the end of episode 6, which for the most part is pretty good. Just seeing what Gideon Goose is up to currently and gives us a reveal of how and who kidnapped Scott Pilgrim. It was the twins robot who is a vegan, so they have vegan powers because Scott was kidnapped through a portal. A vegan robot is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. All robots would be vegan. Doesn't make much sense. Because it has sentient, I don't know. But it was made by the twins. So they go confront them. Then Scott Pilgrim turns up at the door. Well, that was anticlimactic. Then he says he kidnapped himself. Confused noises. This just sounds stupid and doesn't make sense on top of the entire mystery essentially being ruined because he just pops up again with no climactic fight or anything. Just here now. Hooray! Like you don't really get the payoff to the actual mystery. It's so weird. Now the final 2 episodes annoy me so much and get me so tilted about this series. I only think is good. So it turns out that it was future Scott / the twins who kidnapped them. The twins are cool here, sure. Anyway, future Scott shows him a VR tape of the memories on a Virtual Boy. Genuinely, having this VR hyped up and it being a Virtual Boy is the funniest joke in this series if you know what a Virtual Boy is. And if I didn't spoil it right now, whoops, I genuinely laughed so hard for like a minute straight because all the hype it was getting, and then it was just a Virtual Boy. The memories show a reel of how Scott defeated all the evil X's in the original timeline and Ramona and him got married. That's nice, it's wholesome. Shows that the entire series with them that you most likely read ended up positively. That's sweet, they're divorced. I despise this decision. It essentially says, hey, you remember the books / movie? Yeah, they turned out great for those two. No, it didn't. They got divorced and now Scott's in the exact same situation as he is in the books. No girlfriend, living with Wallace, molding over the past. Doesn't that sound so dissatisfactory? After everything in the books, it turned out bad for the protagonist. To me, it just feels like it's crapping on the source material. Now, apparently the creators of the book did say that future Scott isn't any other Scott we've seen so far, but it still annoys me so much. It may be a different Scott, but you haven't shown any major differences to how this Scott, in essence, is different from the book Scott in essence. The essence hasn't changed to show a massive thing hasn't changed. At this point, I just lost most interest in the story, and the story gets even stupider because I don't feel like going completely over the last episode, or really just don't have much to say because I was very disengaged with this episode. The absolute most mega absurd thing, however, is Ramona and old Ramona fuse into Super Ramona. Enough said, I think. So Scott Pilgrim takes off. It was pretty decent. I did enjoy episodes 2 to 6, but the first episode was boring, and the final 2 are so irritating and infuriating. Would I recommend this series? Honestly, no, I wouldn't, especially if you haven't read the source material. It doesn't stick to it at all, and I guess if you go in expecting something different, or haven't read the books or watching a movie knowing it wasn't like the source material, I guess it could be okay. I don't know. You can always just give it a go if you want. I'm not judging. Make up your own opinion. I'm done. I'm finally done with this marathon of everything Scott Pilgrim related. I forgot Scott Pilgrim vs. the animation, which adapts the first part of book 2 where you see the past and was used to promote the movie coming out. God damn it! Anyway, it was fine. The climax was animated surprisingly well, but the rest did look pretty cheap. It was fine, but it just felt a bit oddly paced, and jumping around didn't help. Okay, I'm truly done now. I think. Most likely. So before I leave and get some sleep, I have been here for so long. Oh god, I'm going insane. Let's rank all of these excluding the short. This is going to be difficult because these are all in different mediums, but let's give it a shot. Last, I don't know how many of these there are, is Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. Doesn't reach the highs of the next in line and gets way lower. Keep in mind that this list is my opinion. If you think this is better than the next book, or the next book isn't in the right place, that's fine. I shouldn't need to say that though. Next book is 5, Scott Pilgrim vs. Universe. I disliked most of the book and Ramona's characterization, but the last quarter/third is great. Next is book 4. Pretty good, just not good as the other books, and has a lot more unnecessary sexualization. Next is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game. It's quite fun, but I think my overall enjoyment is around here on the list. This is the most different, so it's the hardest to put inside the list. Next is book 2/3, which is Internal Sadness and Versus the World. It's quite good. I believe they're both on equal levels in terms of my enjoyment of them. Then I had no idea if the movie or Finest Hour is better in my opinion. I keep flip-flopping on which one I would rather watch/read again, so they can share the same #1 spot. Do I regret doing all this? No. It was a fun idea to do, and I found a really great movie I may end up watching again. Oh hey, they disappeared. I kind of forgot about that. Whoops. Ah, what the hell are that?